be alive in no time. But nah, it's just another shot to the heart. It's just a short shot in the dark. It's just another place in the stars. Wonders on every side. Life in marvelous time. Life in marvelous time.
Hello, my name is Anson Asaka. I'm the founder of New Possibility blog, and today I'm going to do a video response to a video by 5723 Michael entitled Affirmative Action and the Negro Slaves. Now, this video is going to focus solely on the substance. In other videos, I've expressed my opinions about how I feel about Mike as a person. But in this video, I'm not going to do any of that. I have two other videos that deal with all of that. So I'm not going to focus on that in this video. I'm going to talk about just the issues. And the issue for today is the issue of affirmative action. First, I'm going to start out by explaining why I support affirmative action. There are two primary reasons why I support affirmative action. Now, I mentioned these in a previous video, but I'm going to elaborate more in this video. The first reason why I support affirmative action is because it is a necessary tool to end discrimination. For centuries, the African American was not a citizen in this country. We did not come here on a Mayflower. We came here in slave ships. We were not recognized as human beings. We were property to be sold and treated worse than animals. We were beaten, we were raped, we were robbed of everything that made us human. We were robbed of our culture, our language, our religions. We were robbed of everything that made us unique. We were robbed of our original culture and our original nationalities. To this day, many of us don't know which tribes or which ethnic groups we descend from in Africa. We have a general sense that we come from Africa, that we come from the west coast of Africa. But unlike other immigrant groups who know exactly where they come from, they know what countries they come from, they know their native language, they know their native culture, and they have a sense of pride. All of that was severed with slavery. We were deprived of our humanity, and we were held back from realizing our full potential for centuries. So that put us far behind in the race for human excellence. And then after slavery, we suffered under a new form of oppression called Jim Crow, where basically we were reduced to second-class citizens in a first-class nation. We were deprived of our rights to be human beings. We were deprived of our right to eat where we want, to go to school where we want, to go to the movies where we want, to do just the basic things in life. We were deprived the right to vote for decades. We were deprived the right to go to an integrated school, to get the best education so that we could be the best person possible. We were denied all of these opportunities. And as a result of that denial, we were set back centuries as a result of the denials during slavery and the denials during Jim Crow. Now, Jim Crow is not ancient history. Many of us have mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, and fathers who lived during the Jim Crow era. So we're not talking about ancient history. This is something that's happened within the last 60 or so years. And slavery only ended 150 years ago. So as a result of those two forms of oppression, the African American has been set back. We've been set back in the race for human excellence. We are not competing on a level playing field. And the most important thing to bring out is the fact that that discrimination continues today. We still live in a world in which white is a badge of privilege in this country. White people are not profiled. And if you look at the school system, even though it ended legally under the Brown versus the Board of Education decision, the fact of the matter is that many of our schools continue to be segregated. They continue to be unequally and unfairly funded. There continues to be an achievement gap between black schools and white schools. There continues to be an uneven distribution of resources to the different schools. So you have prospering, excellent schools in white affluent neighborhoods, and you have crumbling schools in black neighborhoods. So there is no equal playing field, and all the statistics back this up. So that creates a situation where African Americans aren't on a level playing field with other groups. So there's a need for a race conscious program to remedy this past discrimination. And bear in mind, affirmative action does not necessarily say that someone is going to get accepted in a school just because they're black, or they're going to get a job just because they're black. Affirmative action has been crafted in such a way in these times to the point where race is just one of many factors that a school, for instance, will consider in determining whether or not to admit students. So of many factors, race is a factor of a factor. And if you look at the case of Fisher versus the University of Texas, it is clear that race is only a factor of a factor. So it's not as if race is the determining factor. And it's important to note that for decades, African Americans were deliberately denied access to higher education. There were universities that for years denied African Americans the right to attend their universities. So we are not on a level playing field. So that's the first point. The first point is about the history of discrimination and the need to remedy that discrimination. The second reason why I support affirmative action is because it promotes diversity. And several court decisions have talked about how diversity and the need for diversity is a compelling state interest. So under the law, states have a compelling interest to make sure that their schools are racially diverse. And the reason why diversity is important is because it gives people an opportunity to have a full education. Instead of just an environment where there's one particular race and you're only getting one particular perspective on things, if you have diversity, you get a wide range of views on different issues. You get to see different perspectives, and that creates greater opportunity for the students to learn. And it also prepares one for the workplace in the future. It prepares one to learn how to interact with people of different backgrounds, to learn about people of different backgrounds. And that creates more of a racial cooperation and racial harmony if people have an opportunity to interact with each other. That creates an opportunity for people to have more tolerance and to be more accepting of others. And one of the points that Mike raised in his video, he talked about the fact that affirmative action primarily benefits white women. And he raised that point as if to suggest that that point alone makes affirmative action of no use to African Americans. The fact that white women benefit from affirmative action doesn't take away from the fact that African Americans benefit from affirmative action. That's like saying that let's get rid of the equal protection clause because women benefit from it, because gays and lesbians benefit from it, because other groups benefit from it. So let's get rid of it. I mean, we all know that the equal protection law was designed to give African Americans full citizenship rights. It was one of the amendments implemented for that purpose. But it also has a wider impact as well. And to throw that out just because it benefits other groups would be simply ridiculous. And the second point on that issue is the fact that African Americans benefit from affirmative action. If you look at the statistics, in the states where they ended affirmative action, the numbers of enrollment for African Americans declined substantially. And in the description to this video, I will provide links to a report that details all of this information. It's a comprehensive report that cites how when affirmative action was ended in various states, the rates of admission, particularly in the graduate programs, declined substantially. So affirmative action does benefit African Americans. And one of the points that Mike raised in his video, he said, well, it doesn't benefit the people in the inner city and it only benefits a select few. That is not the case. It provides opportunity to all African Americans who are willing to pursue higher education. There are many African Americans that come from low income households and environments, and they have managed to get higher education as a result of affirmative action programs. And even me, I wouldn't be a lawyer today if it wasn't for affirmative action. Affirmative action merely opened the door of opportunity. It is not, contrary to Mike's argument, it is not government dependency. In fact, affirmative action gives one the opportunity to be independent. When you have education and knowledge, you have power. You have the means to do for your own self. So you're not dependent on government aid. You're not dependent on welfare after you graduate from college and get a degree. You're not caught up in the criminal justice system when you have an education and you have a means to employ yourself and provide for your family. That is not dependency. That is independence. So the whole analogy about the grown man drinking on a baby bottle and the analogy about the African American loving to milk the government for assistance, that analogy doesn't hold true because affirmative action gives one the means to be independent. It gives one the knowledge and the necessary skills to be in a position to set up businesses and provide for the community. So those are some of the reasons why I support affirmative action. Now, I'm going to counter several of the arguments that Mike made in his video. One of the main arguments that he made in this video was he kept emphasizing the fact that African Americans have $1.1 trillion in spending power. He kept reiterating that point over and over again. In fact, that was probably one of his primary points. But the fact of the matter is that term, buying power, is a marketing term. It is not a term that actually translates into real economic power. It is a term used by corporations to market goods to certain communities. It has nothing to do with wealth or income. Because if you look at the statistics in terms of wealth and income, it's clear that African Americans still are far behind their white counterparts. And I'll go into those statistics in a minute. The point is this $1.1 trillion is not sitting in some account waiting to be invested by wise investors to set up all kinds of businesses. So we need to dispel that myth of black buying power. And there's a series of articles written by Jared Ball and Black Agenda Report. And I'll post the links in the description to this video so that you can read the article yourself. It goes into complete detail about this whole myth of black buying power. It explains a lot of the points that I'm talking about. And there's a couple of other articles as well that I'll include in the description. And as far as statistics are concerned, again, buying power has nothing to do with wealth. The wealth gap between blacks and whites, according to CNN Money, tripled over the past 25 years. The median net wealth for whites is $265,000. For blacks, it's only $28,000. The home ownership rate for whites is 28% higher than the rate for blacks. Whites inherit far more than African Americans. And another point is the fact that African Americans, when we do pursue our higher education, 4 and 5 of us graduate in debt. So we're saddled with debt and we're not in a position to invest or to save. So that perpetuates this cycle of wealth disparity between blacks and whites. Also, it's important to note that the poverty rate in the black community is substantially higher than the national poverty rate. The national poverty rate is about 15% according to the U.S. Census in 2011. And for African Americans, the poverty rate is 27%. Therefore, the basic point that I'm making is that this so-called black spending power is not a legitimate basis for opposing affirmative action because it's not a reality. It's more of a myth. That number of $1.1 trillion is just a marketing term. It doesn't translate into real economic power. And as I said before, I will cite the sources in the description. And as I mentioned before, one of his main points was that affirmative action perpetuates dependency, and he talked about how African Americans are basically milking the system, and we're like grown men still drinking out of a baby's bottle, relying on the government. Again, education provides an opportunity for someone to be empowered, for someone to be independent. So it's not a perpetuation of dependence. And affirmative action was designed to be limited in time frame. So it's not as if affirmative action is to last forever, but as long as the disparities exist in education and economics and other many areas of American life, as long as those disparities exist, affirmative action will be necessary to level the playing field. And expecting an African American the African American community in general to compete on a level playing field without the assistance of affirmative action. I mean, there are plenty that will be able to compete on that level, but there are others that won't. Many of us will not be able to compete because we've been put in a situation of disadvantage, as I pointed out before. It's like expecting someone to play a game of chess and they start out the game with half of their pieces missing, and you expect them to compete on an equal playing field. You expect them to be able to compete and win in that type of game. The last argument that Mike raised, he talked about how African Americans, once they get a higher education, they abandon their community. He talked about how only a few people benefit from affirmative action. And, as I pointed out before, I'll have a link in the description that cites a report that explains how when affirmative action ended, many African Americans were no longer able to attend graduate programs and even undergraduate programs. So it does have a direct impact on large numbers of people. The second thing is, as far as the middle class is concerned, many African Americans, once they become professionals, some of them do abandon the community. But on the other hand, many of them continue to serve the African American community, even if they no longer live in the Black community, even if they no longer live in the inner city. They continue to give back to their community through their churches, through their civic organizations, through fraternities and sororities, through civil rights organizations. And that's a documented fact. Most of the leaders of civil rights organizations and most of the volunteers of civil rights organizations, many of them come from middle class backgrounds. So every day there are plenty of African Americans of middle class backgrounds who give back to their community and help uplift their community. So that is not an accurate description of what happens in the inner city. There are plenty that give back, and they should be acknowledged and not ignored. And many serve their community on a political level as well. They serve as city council people. They serve as mayors. So they come back to their communities and they give back to their communities. So it is not accurate to say that they abandon the Black community. So they continue to fulfill W.E.B. Du Bois' vision of the talented 10th. They continue to give back to their community, and they continue to uplift their community. And we want to get to a point where there is no talented 10th, and where, you know, most people have an opportunity to a higher education. And that's part of the goal of affirmative action, is to open the door of opportunity so all of us can compete and create a better country.
Can't be alive in no time but now. It's just another shot to the heart. It's just a short shot in the dark. It's just another place in the stars. Wonders on every side. Life in marvelous time. Life in marvelous time.